Hey Boneheads, this is Joe Lewis. Welcome to a great interview with a wonderful director, Gary Sherman. Gary Sherman directed Poltergeist 3, Dead and Buried, Deathline. He gave us one of my just movies that just has a visceral effect on me, Vice Squad. This is a little weird because the other two Boneheads are still in rehab. We did a long interview. It's over right at 2 hours. So we're going to split it up into two episodes. This is the first episode. And then next week, you'll get the second episode. So, like I said, this is just with me, the other two Boneheads, rehab. But don't worry, we will eventually get them cured off the turkey. We go from the counterculture 60s to the Democratic Convention up into Donald Pleasance giving him crap. Wonderful storyteller. I just can't thank Gary Sherman enough. So thanks, Gary. This is part one. Part two will be out next week. Enjoy. When we do these things, we always try to go, whether we've had Mick Garris on the show, I can just go down a list. But when I do it, I try my best to get questions that people don't normally get from other folks. But I can't pass up something that I know you have to talk about all the time, because if there's a living legend someone's worked with, and you're a living legend yourself, I mean, from Dead and Buried, from Poltergeist 3, from Deathline, but you worked with Donald Pleasance in your first movie.
I did. And that was really an amazing experience. And it was, at a time in 1972, Donald was just considered the actor's actor.
Right.
And he was just, he was appearing on Broadway at the time in Man in the Glass Booth. Actually, he was just finishing his run, and he had just won a Tony for it. And Donald was just amazing. And Carrie Jones and I wrote the script. When we were writing the script, we had Donald in mind all the time. And somebody had told me that Donald wanted to do a comedy. And I found out it was true. He was really wanted to do a comedy. And so we wrote that part especially for Donald and for, his brand of humor. And
the nose picking when he walks into the office, right?
Yeah, with the handkerchief and then the darts, but the whole character, and we wrote a background for the character, and that's what we sent off to his agent. We sent just his lines, his pages, and a character sketch of Inspector Cahoon, and he read it and he loved it. And then we talked about the rest. I flew to New York from London and met with Donald. We got together, and I told him, I said, told him what it was, and we talked about the politics of the film, because to me that was the most important thing, was the fact that it was a social commentary. And he just said, I'm in. And
you hear about the rest of it, just social commentary and his background of his
right. But the horror part is the social commentary of the film, and he just loved it and said, I'm in.
So you want to talk about the social commentary a little bit? We have these people, they're living in basically the tunnels, right? Underneath.
Right. Well, the social commentary was a commentary on British classism.
Yes.
And I got to London, and my mother was British, and I left because of the convention in Chicago.
Is that the reason you left? Because that's actually my next question, because you're from Chicago, and I was trying to figure out, according to what I can find, you're from Chicago, and then you end up in London, and it was over the Democratic Convention?
Yep. I left right after the convention. I just didn't want to be in Chicago anymore. And my mother is British.
Mm-hmm.
So I family in London than I have in the States. So, or in England. And so anyways, I just said, I'm going to go live where my mother came from. and so we picked up and moved to London, and um, and I got a green card immediately because of the fact that my mother was British and I had so much family there. They kind of helped me get settled in London.
Yeah.
So, but once I got to London, the the British really kept pointing a finger at Americans, and about how racist we were, and boom, boom, which I agreed with that that we are, but it was like the British were, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. I
Absolutely.
mean, and it really annoyed me. And I love the British, and I love the UK, and but I just thought they needed a little slap in the face about racism and classism, because their history was filled with it. And I mean, their colonization, and the British Empire, and the way they treated the people that as they expanded their empire, and anybody that wasn't white was treated
Mm-hmm.
like shit.
No, absolutely. You
And
can say shit. Yeah, and let you know you can say whatever you'd like.
okay, and I just thought, I want to say this. And I had written several scripts. John Demme was like my best friend when I got to England. He also was an expat at that time living there.
Now you're talking
And
about Jonathan Demme, the director, correct?
yeah, Jonathan Demme, yeah, who
Silence of the
did
Lambs
Sucks.
for our audience out there, or the Corman alum for me. But yes,
Right.
right.
But Jonathan and I worked together. He was my producer. I was directing commercials and he was producing them.
Uh-huh.
And when we decided, everybody kept saying, "Oh, do a feature." So we sat down and wrote, because everybody said, write something. So,
Mm-hmm.
and Jonathan and I had written a whole bunch of scripts together, and they were very political, and they were kind of like student films, they were just so
Mm-hmm.
preachy. So anyhow,
Well, so you're saying you're
what,
a little heavy-handed, because I mean you've been in activism about civil rights and you'd been pretty active, right? I mean you weren't just on the
yeah, yes, I had, but I mean, anyways, nobody wanted to make the scripts we were writing, and
Mhm.
finally we wrote one that because we had a star attached to it, who was Ray Davies from the Kinks.
Yeah.
Ray wanted to make a movie, and so we wrote a movie with Ray, and it was all set up to go, and then Ray decided he wasn't a movie star. He was a rock and roll star. Well, he got convinced by his brother.
I was about to say he's
And
the only one. There's several others who decided they were both.
yeah, but his brother and the rest of the group were not, the Kinks were not happy with Ray going off to do a movie. So he pulled out, and the movie never happened. And the studio that was going to make the movie said to me, "Why don't you write a horror film?"
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, put social commentary into a horror film and you get it made.
Yeah, because you're not
And
the first one to do that.
no, I mean, it started with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein,
Absolutely. Yeah,
and Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, they were all social commentary.
they were.
And I mean, so it had been there forever. I mean, everybody, you can go back to Dickens and the way that he would slide social commentary into his stories. But and Poe, I mean, it has a long history of that.
Right.
And so, anyways, I did that, and it got made, and that's how how I ended up as a British film director.
Well, I mean, I mean, I don't want to say luck. You were preparing yourself for the big jump from the get go, but I find it fascinating. So Donald Pleasance, you say, was easy to work with, and then if you Carpenter ended up loving him, John Carpenter, but John told stories about, he would test him every day on the set. He wasn't, it was like,
Oh,
why am I here?
Donald tested me every day on the set. But I mean, when he wasn't on camera, he was off getting tea for everyone. Um, and one day we were wrapping, and he said, "Gary, I'm not on the call sheet tomorrow." I said, "No, you've got a day off." And he says, "But he said, Bacon is doing his phone call with me, so I have to be there for the other side of the phone call, because he was there when I did my side of the phone call." And I said, you really want to come in just to do the phone call? And he said, "Absolutely." I mean, that's the kind of person that Donald was. And he came in, he says, I want to know, I'm not charging you for this. I'm just send a car to pick me up. And that's the only thing that it's going to cost you, is the car to pick me up and take me home.
That is an amazing story. For people who don't understand, most actors would not have been on that other side of that call. They just
No, usually it's the script supervisor who, or the director or whoever that does the other side of a phone call. And Donald just absolutely insisted that he be there to give to the other actor.
That's incredibly giving.
Oh,
Incredibly giving. I've very few times I've heard that story of interviewing folks, because we do a lot of behind this. We love talking to production people, directors, writers, production managers, production designers, artists, and it's very few times I've heard that story.
yeah, he was amazing. He was just I mean, he was so giving. But I mean, the first day, okay, I'm a 20 something,
Yeah.
I'm like 24, 25 years
And
old.
that's young. That is young
And,
to be running a set.
and, and I had never directed a movie. I directed some documentaries and I did a lot of commercials, but I had never directed a dramatic feature film. And I walk on the set, and there's Donald Pleasance and Norman Rossington. They had probably been in more pictures than I, as an audience, had even seen in my whole life.
Right.
And they're both sitting there with like this, with their arms crossed, looking at me, which they had done on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Okay, boss, what do you want to do?" And it was absolutely a challenge. And whatever, we just we got into it, we did it, and uh,
You rose
it
to
was great. I passed the test. But Donald was such a practical joker. You've seen the movie, so his desk was right in front of a fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
Every time, every time Donald would get up from the desk, he would make a noise, like stomp his foot, off camera, so to say, and go, "Oh," like he'd hit his head on the mantle. And every time he'd do it, I say, "Oh, Donald, are you okay?" And he said, "Yes, I'm an actor." And he would do this every time, and every time he was so convincing, I would react. So finally, I just got to the point one day where I was not going to react to him bumping his head. Or I had gotten to the point. And so one day he gets up and he bumps his head, and he grabs his head with both hands. And he goes, "Oh, God, I really did it." And I'm saying, "I'm not falling for it, Donald." And he go, "Oh," and suddenly blood starts dripping down his forehead. And I goes, "Oh my God, you really did it." And he said, "No, I didn't. I'm an actor." And he had done this with the makeup guy, and he had a blood bag in his hand. And he just laughed so hard. But I mean, that was the end of it. After that, he didn't do it anymore. But
At 24, how was it handling those British crews that you've heard about all these years who could be testy or who were
oh, my
like,
crew was just the best. First of all, I'd been directing commercials there for a number of years, and when you do commercials, you pay your crew a lot of money.
yeah,
So I mean, Alex Thompson, I had worked with dozens of times. I mean, even though he was an Oscar, nominated DP for
yeah.
features, he would do commercials. And I paid him per day what he would get per week on a feature film,
Mm-hmm.
at doing commercials, because that's what happens. And so anyways, I mean, I had worked with Alex. I can't even name. Alex and I had traveled to locations all over the world together, and we had become really good friends, he and Diana, his wife, and his little daughter. His little daughter was just a couple of years older than my daughter, and they were friends. And so it was like Alex and I were like family already. And so, and I told him, I said, you want to come do a feature with me, and we're going to do it really low budget. And and we all decided how much time we could afford to take off of commercials to do this movie. And that's what we did. And Alex put a camera crew together that was absolutely fantastic. And I knew most of those people from commercials too. And Joe and Tony Teeger, who were the prop masters, had just finished Barry Lyndon with
Kubrick.
but with Kubrick, yeah. And um, uh, but they had done commercials with me too. And Joe and I actually had become really good friends. He was married to an American woman, and who I had known. And so anyways, and then everything else just fell into place. The production designer, Dennis Gordon-Orr, I had met actually in France. And it just, the whole crew was great. I mean, it was great. And my first AD was Louis Mora Farrell, who Louis had been my AD on commercials for several years already.
Yeah.
And it was funny because everybody fought me using Louis because he was a commercials first AD. But Paul Maslansky, who was our line producer on the show,
Uh-huh.
kind of tested Louis and said, okay. And he says, and I'll be there anyway. So and Louis did a great job, and kept a real family feeling on the show, because it was a tough show to shoot. We were actually shooting in abandoned tunnels.
Yeah.
So I mean, we had people whose job was just to keep the real rats away.
Right.
I mean, there were rats everywhere, and everything stank, and it was we had to spray down everything with disinfectants every morning when we before we started shooting. And it was not a pleasant not a pleasant shoot. The only thing that was pleasant was Donald.
Well, Paul Maslansky, he went on for fame for Police Academy, correct?
Yes, he did. Paul was so funny. Paul had mainly produced a lot of movies, and all different shapes and sizes. He had done the Hammer films,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Right.
and he had just when I met Paul through Jonathan. Jonathan knew Paul from New York.
Yeah.
Jonathan Demme.
Right.
And when we finished writing the script, when Carrie and I finished writing the script and Jonathan read the script, he just said, "Oh, I got people I want to send this to." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "I'm going to send it to Paul Maslansky, who's coming to London because he just finished a film for Jay Cantor and Alan Ladd Jr. that he did in Israel." And so anyways, the Paul was the first outsider to read Deathline, and he just loved it. And he called me and he says, "Can I give this to Jay and Laddie?" And I said, "Well, I was going to give it to John Daly because that's who asked me to write it in the first place." He said, "No, let me give it to Jay and Laddie."
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Fine." And the next thing, I got a call from Jay Cantor, and Jonathan negotiated the deal, because I mean, he was my producer at the time, and he was going to produce the movie. So he went in and sold me as the director to Jay Cantor and Alan Ladd Jr. And he and he was going to produce with Maslansky. Then Jonathan went off with Joe Viola, who was a director that worked with our company, and they went off to shoot something in Los Angeles, and that's when Jonathan met Roger Corman.
For everybody, yeah.
And Corman just was blown away by Jonathan, and which was easy to do because Jonathan was an amazing human being. And Corman said, "Come to work for me." And Jonathan calls me from California and says, "Roger Corman just offered me a job." And I said, "Take it. Are you kidding?" I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, what a break it could be for you. And he said, "Well, what about Deathline?" And I said, "Well, Paul, you were going to produce it with Paul, so Paul will produce it without you. I don't think Paul really needs you." and he said, "Wow." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Joe and I are both going to go to work for Corman. Joe's going to and I'm going to produce, and I'm going to direct, and he's going to produce." So I said, "Go for it, man." And boom, boom, the rest is history for Jonathan.
That's a fantastic.
And
go ahead.
yeah, and Paul and I did Deathline.
Well, it's a fantastic story just for our audience. I mean, if they're not familiar with Alan Ladd Jr. or Laddie, to most people who knew him, he ran 20th Century Fox. He's the man that greenlit Star Wars and Alien.
And Jay was his lifelong business partner. I mean, they've never done anything separately, and Jay has always been, the backup for Laddie. And there are no two people in the world closer than those two guys. They, they were there for the birth of each other's children, and they just, they're an amazing. They still are. They're still best friends. Jay will turn 95 this year.
Oh,
and Laddie is 85, and Jay's unbelievable. Jay's like he's 25 instead of 95. I talk to Jay every week.
Do you really? You're still friends after all this time?
Oh, he's one of the people I love most in the whole world. He's just an amazing guy, and he's been my mentor for my whole career. And I mean, we could do an hour on Jay. Jay's career is, he was at one time the biggest agent in Hollywood. He was the biggest agent at MCA before they bought Universal.
Yeah.
And got broken up as an agency. But when they were an agency, they were the agency. I mean, what MCA was back in the beginnings of MCA, they dwarf what CAA is today. I mean, it's just, they ruled, MCA ruled the world of show business, stage, screen, radio, and television.
Yeah.
And Jay was one of the biggest agents there. So he started when he was very young.
I'm curious, and this is not necessarily. Oh, bye. Have a good time.
My wife was walking by.
No, I told her I was saying hi. I thought you might be looking for her appointment. So what I was going to, this is getting a little off topic, but I know you were. So did you and Jonathan basically, was it music that you both loved, because you were a session musician, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jonathan and I just, got hooked up. Actually, who introduced Jonathan and I, this is really unbelievable, was Robin Hardy.
Robin Hardy. Okay.
to
Okay.
direct Wicker Man.
Oh, I should have known that off the top of my head. I am so sorry. I've Give me credit for keeping up most of this, but
Yeah.
Robin Hardy slipped my mind.
Well, when I first got to London, Robin owned a production company, and when I got I got a call from J. Walter Thompson, and they knew that I was in England or in London, and they had a commercial they wanted me to direct, and they asked me if I was hooked up with a production company, and I said no. They said, well, we have a commitment from this one production company, and we want you to do this commercial. So maybe you could do this commercial through this production company. And it was Robin's production company. And so anyways, and Jonathan was working for Robin's production company.
Oh, okay.
So that's how Jonathan and I got hooked up, and we eventually left Robin and set up our own company. And everybody's heard the story. We had a third partner, and it was Michael Mann. And, and it didn't work out too well.
Are you saying he had too much personality, or he was too Michael Mann? I'm trying to think of a nice way to put it.
Michael Mann is one of the most disgusting human beings I have ever met in my life, and
thank you.
He's a horrible human being, and almost anyone who's met him can confirm that. But anyways, I've talked about Michael many times in many interviews,
okay.
And
I wasn't actually trying to get there. And if you want to, after we're done, I'll tell you a story about a friend of mine who interviewed him and a horrible nightmare that was sometime.
Okay.
But you probably already can guess where it went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah. All right. So back to, why was there such a break between that and your next movie, which was Dead and Buried? What?
AIP.
Yep. American International Pictures.
Yes, the fact that Deathline got sold behind our backs by our financier to AIP was the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life. The day that we got the call David Niven Jr. was running CIC at the time, which was the co-distribution company between Paramount and Universal for Europe. And Frank Yablans, who was president of Paramount, happened to be in town in London. And David had seen Deathline in the director's cut, because David was a friend of Jay and Laddie's and of mine, and he wanted to see the movie, so he saw the movie. Well, he just loved it, and as an aside, David is such a good friend. He does a cameo in my film Lisa.
Oh, really?
He's the guy that comes in to buy flowers in the flower shops and makes a pass at Cheryl Ladd. But anyways, David told Frank about the movie, Frank Yablans, and Frank said, I want to see it. So David screened it for Frank. Frank loved the movie. I mean, just went nuts over the movie. Called Jay and Laddie and just said, stop showing the film to anybody. Paramount's buying this film worldwide, except for the UK, because Rank already owned it for the UK. And he said, I want it for the United States, for South America, North America, Europe, Asia. I want the movie. And so Jay picked up the phone and called the people in New York who had put up the money for the film and said, don't do anything. We've sold the picture to Paramount for worldwide distribution. And they said, too late. And Jay says, what do you mean too late? And they said, we sold it to AIP. Jay goes, what? And we're on speakerphone. Laddie and I were in the room, and all of us, our faces just dropped. I mean, what could be worse? Well, we made a serious movie,
Yep.
and they sold it to the company that does beach blanket bingo.
Yep.
I mean, and and they said it was too well. It ended up that what they had done was sold it on a cross collateralization, which was basically illegal. They had other films at AIP that had lost money,
Yeah.
and they were going to make up the money with this one. So they basically gave this film to AIP, and Samuel Z. Arkoff,
Yep.
who was the most tasteless human being that has crossed his. I mean, he comes to London to for something else, but he called me and he wanted to meet me, and he's staying in the royal suite at the Savoy Hotel. And I mean, Sam made a lot of money selling crap.
Yeah.
But
a lot of people did.
And I go up to his suite. He opens the door, and he's standing there in this silk dressing gown with a big SZA embroidered
You're
on it.
shitting me. He actually had a
got,
dressing gown with his initials on it.
Yeah, I mean, huge.
I've never heard that story before. That was.
And he's got a cigar the size of a baseball bat that he's puffing away on. And he says, "Come on in there," you know. And there's a big tough, well, a little tough guy.
Like he was right out of Central Casting for every stereotype. Correct.
He was Edward G. Robinson.
Yep.
In Little Caesar, you know.
Yep.
I mean, so he starts telling me, he says, "I don't know why you want to work with people like Alan Ladd and Jay Cantor. They don't know one end of a camera from the other." And he's saying, you should work with companies like mine because we know how to make movies and da 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 da. And he just starts going on about Jay and Laddie, who, you know, I mean, as you already mentioned, these were the people that greenlit Star Wars, that greenlit Blade Runner, that
Alien. I mean, it's just the list.
Yeah, Alien. It the turning point. Chariots of Fire.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just unbelievable, the films that they've made.
So successful that it basically ran him out of 20th Century Fox. I mean, Star Wars was such a hit that because they didn't have the sequel rights, right? I mean, it ended kind of.
Oh, I had stories about that, but
oh, you do? Well, would be more than to listen to them.
But anyways, I stood up and I said, "Sam, thank you very much. It was nice to meet you. I'm leaving." And I walked out. In the meantime, he then and his cohorts, I think there's somebody named Nicholson, I can't even remember his name, they cut the shit out of Deathline.
Yeah.
And they cut the tracking shot out.
Yeah.
They redubbed some of Donald's scenes because they didn't think that the American audience could understand his British accent.
And we're talking about someone who was famous at the time. Donald Pleasance wasn't not an unknown commodity.
Donald Pleasance had won Oscars.
He was
won BAFTAs.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he had done, you know, The Great Escape. I mean,
that's what I mean.
The Collector.
Yep.
I mean, he'd worked with Roman Polanski and you know, 2 movies, and I mean, this was you know, and he just didn't give a shit. He didn't care. He, you know, all that mattered to him was. So anyways, you know, and then they did an advertising campaign that you didn't even know it was the same movie.
Yeah.
They changed the title to Raw Meat.
Right, which is.
And did that yellow poster that was just awful. And I mean, and I kept saying to everybody, how could he do that? I mean, we worked hard to make this movie, and he can do anything he wants with it. And I just said, you know, fuck this. I said, you know, advertising agencies don't change my commercials this much.
Yeah.
And I just said, fuck it. I don't want to do this anymore. And I just went back to doing commercials. And I had no intention of ever doing a feature again. Then, Jay and Laddie leave, and Laddie becomes the president of Fox, and
Yeah.
Jay becomes the president of First Artists.
Mm-hmm.
And the two of them keep talking to me and saying, "Oh, you stop doing commercials, come over here," and boom, boom. So finally, I made a halfway move, and I bought a place in Los Angeles and started spending time in LA. And I got more interested in doing television than doing another feature, because I felt more protected in television as a producer and a director and a writer.
Yeah.
And television was letting me do what I wanted to do. So I was doing commercials in England. I didn't do commercials in the States. I didn't want to set up the commitment to do that. But I started doing a lot of television.
Which leads me to a question of the difference. You say you felt protected. Is it because television has, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but there's a lower risk. Like, you have an episode coming out each week, right? And it has to be quick, and the decision is made, and it's coming. You have to deliver the product, as opposed to
A feature, you're gonna put 2 years of your life into a feature, and then it's got 1 weekend to prove itself, or it goes away. Where doing television, especially, I was producing series,
Mm-hmm.
and hiring myself to direct as often as I wanted. At that time we were doing 22 episodes a year, which doesn't happen too much now. Actually, it's sometimes up to 26 episodes a year.
Yeah.
And you make it, and it's on the air a month later, and more people see it than ever saw Star Wars.
Yeah.
Right. And at that time, anyhow, and it's fun, and and if you raise the bar yourself, you keep the bar high, and you make stuff that you're proud of. It's fun, and I loved the volume, and I loved the intensity, and I loved the fact that I could do 22 episodes a year, and out of those 22 episodes, if I liked all of them, I was happy. If I loved half of them, I was happy. And I made a lot of episodes of a lot of television shows that I was really proud of, and made a lot of television movies that I was really proud to do. And it wasn't the stress that you have doing a feature.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went 8 or 9 years without doing a feature film. And Jay and Laddie, then Jay left First Artist and joined Laddie at Fox, and they made Star Wars, and it was, and they kept telling, "Oh, come do a feature, and there was nothing that I really wanted to do. And then Ron, I had met Ron Shusett. Well, I met Ron Shusett came knocking on my door one day. Literally, I had never met him, and it was a knock on my door, and I opened the door, and there's this crazy little person standing there.
Was he wearing the ascot? Please tell me he was wearing the ascot.
He was wearing a scarf.
Yeah, a scarf.
He had a little wool scarf tied around his neck, and a kind of almost beret-like hat.
This is going to be really obscure for some of our listeners right now, but exactly what I was talking about.
yeah. Ronnie always wore a scarf and a hat of some kind, and always some brimless or little watch cap kind of thing. And he's just, Ronnie just bubbled with energy. And he says, "Hi, my name's Ron Shusett, and I'm going to be one of the biggest producers in Hollywood one day. and I love Deathline, and I have a script that I want you to read, because only the person who directed Deathline could make this script.
Yep.
And that was Dead and Buried. And he said, and I'm about to do a movie, and maybe you could get involved in the movie we're about to do a movie called Alien. And
now I see the connection, by the way. I didn't even doing my research. I was like, now how did it, and then it didn't even occur to me that Alien and Aladdin all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, anyways, there was a point at which they discussed me directing Alien, but I mean, Ron was like 100% in favor of me doing Alien, although I didn't think Alien didn't grab me that much. I must say. I mean, I thought it would be a good movie, but for me as a director, I'm not into sci-fi that much. And there was I don't know, there wasn't enough of a human story for me when I read the original script. It was, you know, before David Giler and Walter Hill.
And the other producer was Gordon. Oh man, I forgot.
Gordon Carroll.
Gordon Carroll.
And Gordon Carroll was, you know, kind of pushing for Walter to direct.
Yeah.
And wouldn't even talk to me about it. And also Walter was a friend of mine, and I had no Walter out of that position. But then, you know, Fox released The Driver, and you know, with Ryan O'Neal, and The Driver just tanked.
Yeah.
And there was no way that Walter was going to end up doing Alien after, and then they just moved, and then the idea of Ridley came in, and boom, and
the rest is history.
And nobody could have done that film better than Ridley. So it was perfect.
That's interesting thought right there. So you could have directed Alien. You clearly didn't push to it, sir, but you're looking back saying Ridley was the best choice. You would not have been the best choice.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I mean, you know, whereas I was the best choice for Dead and Buried.
Agreed.
And Ridley couldn't have done Dead and Buried as good as
I absolutely. But I find that fascinating because, you know, you have to have at least an emotional attachment to the material, or at least an understanding. Can you explain that? Of what is it? An emotion inside? Is it I understand, I know where this world is, I can see it, my mind's eye, for lack of a better phrase. How do you pick it? How do you know that that's it? Can you describe the feeling of Alien's not for me, even though this is going to be huge, but Dead and Buried is for me? No one can do Dead and Buried like I can. Do you see my question? I know
it's just, you know, it's how it emotionally grabs you.
So it's an emotion.
Yeah, it is. It's all about them. I mean, I make movies from here. I don't make them from here.
Okay.
I mean, it starts here, it goes through here for filtering, and then it sends it back to here, and from here it goes to my hands, and I make the movie. You know, I also turned down Omen. The Omen, and which was probably a really major mistake on my part, but but you know, I turned it down. Mace Neufeld came to me with the script, and wanted me to take it to Jay and Laddie, because he knew they were looking for a picture for me to do, and I just said, the script needs a total rewrite. I mean, it just doesn't grab me. And so anyways, you know, I said, I'm not interested. And then they took it to Dick Donner, and and Dick took it to Fox for them. And but Dick said, the script sucks, it needs a total rewrite. Which I wasn't. You know, I was what, 27 years old or something, and had done one movie and a lot of television. and I didn't know the game. I didn't know that you could lie to the producers and take it to the studio and tell the studio what you really thought, but you had told the producers something else. And had I known that, I probably would have ended up doing The Omen, because I would have taken it to Jay and Laddie and said, the script sucks, but it's a really good idea. And, you know, I mean, I liked the underlying thing of The Omen, but I hated the script. The script was awful. And the first script.
Yeah.
And later it got good, but you know, but again, Dick did a great job.
Well, yeah, he's excellent, but I'm curious
Well,
how yours would have been different. Have you thought about it? Of where how you would have changed and what you would have changed?
no, that would have been futile.
Yeah,
And
but
it made me more depressed, because Omen I should have directed.
okay.
I mean, that was a big mistake on my part. And you know, I could go into it deeper, because I talk to young filmmakers all the, actually, without mentioning any names, I do a Zoom. I'm part of a Zoom meeting that happens every Thursday night, and most of the people on the Zoom calls are household names within the world of horror,
I'm
and
assuming one of them's
it's
Del
like,
Toro.
is what?
Del Toro, I'm assuming.
No, no, Guillermo's not part of it.
Oh, because he is a fan.
Yeah, he is a fan.
He lavishes praise on you, sir.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate it. But they're most not. These are mostly young. I'm the grandpa on this Zoom call.
Would one of them be Eli?
No, I'm not. Actually, I'm not allowed to say. It is basically a secret society, and and we talk about all kinds of things, and we bring in a lot of young filmmakers to talk to. And there was somebody who, a young filmmaker who had been given a script recently, and just said, God, I see a movie in this and I really want to do it, but the script is so awful, and the writer is one of the producers, and I don't know how to deal with it, but I really want to make this movie, but I got to tell them that I have to do a page 1 rewrite on it.
Yeah.
And I told the Omen story.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Lie to the producers, and then when they get, and when you get the deal with the studio, then tell the studio how you really feel, and gain allies and convince them that what you want to do is the right way to do it. And so, you know, so I gave him that advice. And
you got to keep me posted if it works. You don't even need to tell me names later, but
okay,
now I'm just jealous thinking of all the people I could interview in a room, but that's beside the point. We'll keep going, since you're not going to give me access to who all that is. But
well, you know what? Somebody, who was it? I was telling somebody about this thing, but not, you know, of course, not mentioned. We're not. We basically sign a blood oath that we won't mention anything that we talk about, you know, in detail, and so I know names. But anyway, somebody who was, oh, I know, it was, you know, I'm very good friends with Andrea Sabacetti, you know, who's the executive editor of Rue Morgue. And I was telling Andrea about this. She was interviewing me about something, and I told her about what we do, and she said, "Oh, I would love to come one night. Do you think they'd let me, you know, sign in one night?" And I brought it up to everybody on the following Thursday, and everybody said, nope, no journalists.
Oh,
No journalists.
you know, calling me that is the kiss of death of someone who's failed on many, many short films and been successful most of his life. As I always tell people, oh man, I had to get a real gig because I failed at the other one. But this is
sorry, I didn't
no,
mean it.
no. But it was more of just our conversational type as we do these things of letting you know this is kind of here's the nice thing you're going to spend your Saturday morning doing this.
Yep.
So what other person, so there's 2 or 3 characters in your life that I have to ask about that I find fascinating that I'll never get the chance to meet, that I have just a litany of stories about. One of them, not so much with Donald. I didn't have a lot of stories about Donald, but the other one was Dan O'Bannon. And I'll never get to meet Dan O'Bannon. He
No, but you know, Dan and I almost had a passing relationship. I, you know, I met Dan a few times while they were doing Alien, and
he's one
talked
of
to
the
him
writers
about,
of Dead and Buried for the people listening.
right, but Dan was not around when we were doing Dead and Buried.
Really?
I had most of my encounters with Dan were prior to Dead and Buried. Dan was just off into other things at that point, and he was a little miffed at me actually about one of the thing. What the biggest change that I made in Dead and Buried was I eliminated all the mumbo jumbo.
Mm-hmm.
There was all kinds of stuff about, you know, how Dobbs did it, and you know, and
techie speak,
kind of mystical kind of stuff, and voodoo, and
was it kind of Lovecraftian? Because he was
yes, it was.
he was such a fan of Lovecraft, you know, and it came
It
from
was. It was very Lovecraftian, and just filled with. And I'm much more into people and than mysticism, yeah, which mysticism doesn't do it for me. I really love relationships between human beings,
mm-hmm.
and motivation based on humanity, and so I had convinced Ron that we should lose all the mumbo jumbo,
yeah,
and concentrate. There's only one vestige of the mumbo jumbo that's still in the movie, and Ron just begged me and said, no, please, let's just do that one thing. And that was, you know, when they reconstruct the hitchhiker.
Yeah.
Janet, you know, Melody Anderson, steps out of the shadows, and
that's me.
my wife's name is Janet. She heard me say Janet. She said, "That's me."
Janet.
I married Janet. Yeah.
Funny.
And you know, her favorite line from any of my movies actually is when Dobbs says, "Janet, my masterpiece."
I can imagine why. Yeah.
But I mean, I met my Janet, years after I did Dead and Buried. But anyways, I mean, oh yeah. So when the hitchhiker is lying there, and Janet steps out of the shadow, and then steps back, and then she becomes alive.
Yeah.
Ronnie just loved that scene, and so I said, well, I'll ease it in, and just it'll come in and it'll go away, and you'll get that feeling. And Ronnie thought it was important to involve Janet in Dobbs's world, other than us just talking about it. So anyways, I went along with that, but all the rest of the mumbo jumbo was gone, and put into that one speech that Dobbs does at the end, where he says, "Call it voodoo, call it black magic,
yeah,
but you know, it's my art." And that's as much as we give to that. And uh, and Dan was upset about that. He was not happy that he loved all that Lovecraftian
Yeah.
mysticism.
Yeah. I mean, it would come out later, and it's not like it stopped there. It come out later in his work more and more.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, he just kind of, and he was off doing something else, and he never showed up in Mendocino.
Mm-hmm.
He never came up at all while we were shooting. And so my relationship, I don't really have any Dan O'Bannon stories. But if you want, who else are you asking about?
Dan
I
O'Bannon.
hope no. Let's move on to the next person that you wanted to talk about.
Oh, well, we were going to get to, well, it was more of a someone whose last name was Hauser. Um,
Oh, Wings. I'll talk about Wings. But before we go off into Wings, let's talk about Stan Winston.
please, you talk about Stan Winston all you want, because I actually don't have a Stan Winston question. So please talk about him and talk about the effects.
Stan Winston. Actually, as you probably know, there's a new 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray of Dead and Buried that's
Uh-huh.
about to come out from Blue Underground.
I actually missed that. If it makes you, I'm sorry, I haven't actually seen it yet. So now you're going to cost me more money. Hopefully, some of it's going to your pocket.
Yeah, well, it's unbelievable. The
Yeah.
new this it's a 3-disc set, and it's absolutely incredible. And the extras on it are amazing, including like I think it's a 28-minute interview with Stan that was done by David Gregory
Uh-huh.
like several years ago. Well, it had to be several years. I think it was like, God, it's almost, I think it was done 16 or 18 years ago,
Yeah.
um, before Stan got sick. And it was meant to be for something, and they never put it together, and they never used it before. So it's now on this
It's awesome.
this 4K disc, and it is absolutely fantastic. With Stan talking about, Dead and Buried being one of his first major pictures that he
Uh-huh.
did, and it was before he had his company, and he had to do all the work himself, and how he and I worked together, and like going back into the script and figuring out the best way to do each scene. And it's an absolutely fantastic interview. And about how we argued. Well, we argued about one thing. We had one major
What was it?
argument. Well, it's funny because the way I remembered it is not the way Stan told the story, but it was close.
Well, we rearrange
It,
the furniture in our minds, don't we? In our memories, we
yeah,
rearrange them.
the screaming head,
Yeah.
the burned head,
Yeah.
and um, Stan actually admitted on this thing that it was in the script that the head was upside down, and we had always talked about the head being upside down, but he felt that the head would be more expressive if it was right side up. And he and when we actually set it up on the location, and it was, the van was upside down, the burning van was upside down. He went at me and said, "Why don't you turn it and make it right side up for the scream?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Stan, I would have to completely you know, how are we going to turn it over on camera?" And boom, boom, boom. And anyways, we got into a big argument about it. And he said, "Well, it's going to look like shit upside down. Do you know how hard I worked on this?" And blah 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 bump. And so anyways, in this interview, one of the things he says is, he says, "I was really being an asshole." And and he said, "I wouldn't have blamed Gary if he never would have wanted to work with me again, because I was acting like an old lady." And he said, "You know what?" He said, "I've looked at it." And he said, "Yeah, I've looked at it upside down, right side up. And you know what? It does work just as well upside down as it would have worked right side up."
But it's
And
unnerving upside down, right? I mean, it's just more. to me, it's unnerving to see it upside. You do what I mean?
Well, you don't expect them to be alive upside down. Right side up, I think it wouldn't have been as much of a
That's what it's
surprise.
just kind of, it's unnerving to watch it that way.
In the same way, the needle in the eye, we had shot it several different ways, including one where it was a singular shot of her, you know, from her face and the needle going right into the eye. Um, and it didn't work. It worked better that we started to see her hand come down and cut to the needle going into the eye.
Mhm.
It became much more of a shock. It was too deliberate as a single motion, and Stan argued with me about that too, but I mean not as adamantly, because he agreed in the end that the way that it was shot, he said, you know, it would have shown off had we seen the arc of her hand taking it into the eye, it would have shown off his work better. But as far as filmically and emotionally, it worked better the way that we actually put it together. But anyways, he and I had so much fun on that film, and I just love Stan Winston. And when in, I guess it was 2001 or 2002, when I was honored at and Deathline was honored at the New York Film Festival in the scary movie section that was done by the Lincoln Center Film Society. Stan actually came. He showed up there, and it was really great. I had no idea at the time that he was as sick as he was,
Mhm.
and he didn't tell anybody. And I saw him in Los Angeles a few times after that, and he never intimated. And you know, one of the worst things about being in show business is hearing about your friends dying on the radio.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine, because it just gets out so quick and you don't have the time for example, someone passes and you're a friend, then someone calls you and it's usually another friend or another acquaintance or a family member, and then you'll hear about it, especially now on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, it's just awful. I mean, I can name when John Alcott, uh, who had been a friend of mine for years and years, and from when he was working with Stanley
Yeah.
Kubrick, um, and and John had done Vice Squad for me, and then
Uh-huh.
you know, then when I was offered Wanted Dead or Alive, I called Johnny and said, "You want to come back and do another movie with me in LA?" And he said, "Absolutely." And he was going to do Wanted.
Mhm.
And Sue, his wife, called me and said, "Gary, can you not use Johnny for Wanted Dead or Alive?" She said, "He doesn't know I'm making this call, but he's not feeling well, and he's not doing well, and he's been overworking. He just did Greystoke, and
Mhm.
he's exhausted. And I just don't want him flying to Los Angeles and doing an all-night picture again with you."
Yeah.
And uh, and I said, "Sure, Sue, I'll find somebody else to do the movie." Because she was really worried about him. So, anyways, that's when I met Alex Nepomniachtchi, and who
Mhm.
became my new favorite cinematographer.
Yeah.
Um, and anyway, we were in the second week of shooting Wanted Dead or Alive, and somebody comes walking onto the set and saying, "Hey, did you hear John Alcott just died?" That's how I heard that my friend John Alcott died,
Yeah,
by
that's a
somebody shouting, "Hey, did you hear John Alcott died?" And doo-doo. So um, Sue was right. They asked me not to use him on the picture because he wasn't well, and he had a heart attack at quite a young age, and died. It was a hard time for me, and it was the same with Stan. I heard on the radio, Stan Winston, special effects genius, passed away this afternoon from cancer, and doo-doo. And it was Jack Albertson as well.
Mhm.
Um, I had dinner with Jack the night before he died, and we had done his ADR that afternoon, and we all knew that he was dying. I mean, there was no secret. Everybody, we were taking a chance using him on the movie in the first place, and because it was he was sick. He had cancer. He was dying. We knew that. We had to take care of him. We had a nurse and stuff for him while he was doing the movie, and but it was still hard out. So we did ADR in the afternoon, and then he and his wife and I went out to dinner that night with some other people, and said goodnight, and boom, and I go home, and I wake up in the morning, and my clock radio wakes me up in the morning, and the first thing I hear is actor Jack Albertson was rushed to the hospital early this morning to Cedars-Sinai, and where he passed away. And boom, I couldn't believe it. I was just basically in shock.
Gary, do you think a lot of people keep it secret just because of the way the business is? Do you think Stan kept it secret, not necessarily because he didn't want to tell anybody, but just because of not showing weakness? Or I'm just curious if you're insight into that. Because you knew him better. Of course, I never met him, but
he was a very private person.
Okay.
Stan. I mean, Stan was 100% a real human being who didn't hide much. I mean, his feelings were out there. He was very honest with people, but he was very private as far as his own life went. And I mean, I've known so many people, but I didn't know anything about Stan. Zalman King. I knew about Zalman's cancer from the day that it was diagnosed. I mean, Zalman was, one of my best friends, and but Zalman just had me sworn to secrecy and everything because he just wanted to keep working.
Yeah,
and he did. He worked straight up to the day that he died. Boy, he worked straight up until the time that he was too sick to work. Zalman, I didn't hear about on the radio. I was there. I mean, Zalman was one of my best friends ever. And so I was by his bedside as long as I could. I was already living in Chicago at that time. And so I would just go back and forth. And then I stayed out there for an extended time to be with him and Pat, his wife, who passed away last year. Anyways,
I know I didn't mean to get down didn't mean to go down the road, but you've had such a long career, and you've met so many influential producers, directors. Like Zalman produced and directed, right?
Yeah.
All right, Boneheads, that was our first part one. I know it was a little somber at the end, but I think it was important to leave it in. The next episode, we pick right up with Vice Squad and go on from there. So tune in for next week for our part 2 with Gary Sherman.